Hello. Welcome, Coach Vusi here. We are discussing Eco 10B. We're going to combine study unit 8, 9, 10. Look, there's not much we are going to discuss on these three study units. Hence, we are combining them, and it's going to be one of the shortest lessons. The reason is that it's a repetition of the macroeconomic objectives which we did in study unit 1. So we're just summarizing it a little bit and maybe touching on things that we might have missed. It's designed like that, so it's just a summary. So I'm going to follow the notes. I'm not going to read through everything. My interest is to demonstrate where I have to demonstrate. So we're going to start with inflation. We demonstrated how to measure inflation. What you need to know more than anything is the two methods of calculating inflation. Method number 1 is called month on the same month during the previous year. Month on the same month during the previous year. Method number 2 is annual average on annual average. Okay? What it means when they say month on the same month during the previous year, it means that they take inflation of, for example, December. Just use the permanent marker. Anyway, I'm going to wipe it off later on. They take inflation on December 2021 versus December 2022. Sorry. Let me try and bring our camera a bit closer. You don't really have to see me, by the way. Further back a little bit. And then I think this would do. Okay. Now, remember when you calculate inflation, you will be given the consumer price indexes. You don't calculate consumer price indexes. They are always given. So you use those consumer price indexes to calculate the inflation rate. Okay? If the consumer price index, for example, was 10.2 in December 2021, and then it's 11.00 in December 2022, when you calculate inflation rate, it's current minus previous over previous times 100. Okay, so it's going to be 11.00 minus 10.2 current minus previous over previous 10.2 times 100. 11 minus 10.2 divided by 10.2 times 100. So your inflation rate would be 7.84%. 7.84%. That's a method number 1. It's in your notes, by the way. You don't have to memorize from my voice. It's in your notes. Double check it. And then let's look at method number 2. Method number 2 is annual average on annual average. What they do, they add inflation for January, February, March, the consumer price indexes, April, this is 2021, by the way. And then you have also for 2022, January, February, March, April, but this would be 12 months for each of these two pairs. But I'm just going to show you with these 2 months. Let's say it was 8. In January it was 8.2, February it was 8.5, March it was 9%. This is the consumer price index. In April it was 9.1. Okay, usually these figures keep on growing because inflation keeps on growing from 8 to 8.5. These are just guess numbers, but go and check. There's a table on your textbook, page 383, the 5th edition. I'm not sure about the 6th edition, but somewhere these books will always differ with 1 page or 2 pages. Somewhere there you will find it. Let's say here it's 9. Okay, let's say it's 9.5, 9.9, 10.1, 10.5. You'll be given the price indexes like this. Now this one you are calculating averages. What do you do when you're calculating averages? You add the total here. You add the total here. So here, let's see what we have. 8.2 plus 8.5 plus 9 plus 9.1. You have 34.8. Okay. Okay. 34.8. Since you are calculating average, you divide by the number of months you have added. In practice, these things will be 12 months. Even this side, another 12 months. So after getting the total, you'll be dividing by 12. But since I'm only making an example, I used only 4 months. After getting the total, I will divide by 4 months. And then we'll get a consumer price index. So it's 34.8 divided by 4 months equals to 8.7. Let's go this side. 9.5 plus 9.9 plus 10.1 plus 10.5. Here we have 40. And then we're going to divide by 4 months. 1, 2, 3, 4. I said in practice, you will have January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, until December. Doesn't have to be from January to December. It can be from March to April, as long as it's 12 months. Okay? In practice, you will have 12 months here. So whatever figure you get, you will divide it by 12. But since I only used 4 months, whatever figure I got, I divided by 4. So 40 divided by 4 equals to 10. So now, how do we then calculate the inflation? I'm going to use this little space. Same method now. So it's going to be current minus previous divided by previous. So it's going to be 10 minus 8.7 over 8.7 times 100. Let's see. 10 minus 8.7, 8.7 divide by 8.7 times 100. The inflation rate that we get, remember there we got that one. The inflation rate here is 14.94%. That's how you calculate inflation. Please know these two measures. But usually you will not be calculating. Usually you just need to know them and define them. And they are perfectly spelled out in your notes. And then you also need to know the difference between the consumer price index and the producer price index. The main thing is that consumer price index measures, it's a basket of measuring inflation. It consists of goods and services, consumer goods and services. While the producer price index, it's a measure of, or consists of, production goods and there's no services. So, okay, let me just try and put it differently. Consumer price index measures the cost of living. Producer price index measures the cost of production. Perfect. Then, for further characteristics, again, the 5th edition, check page 3.383 again, same page. And for 6th edition, it should be maybe the next page or previous page, somewhere there you will find it. So you'll see how they differ. And then read also about the implicit GDP deflator, the the effects of inflation. This one, let me just try and dwell a little bit on it. Try to imagine, don't memorize this, try to imagine what effects does inflation have. Remember, what is inflation? It's the general increase in price levels over a period of time. So how does inflation affect you and I? Number one, the distribution effects in the economy. Remember the macroeconomic objectives where the distribution of income and stuff. Yes, it affects that objective. Number one. How does it affect the distribution effect? It affects the distribution effect because it redistributes incomes and wealth, or it disturbs the distribution of income and wealth. Usually inflation favors borrowers than lenders. Let me give you a good example. If you borrow me 10 rand today and the price of bread is 10 rand, right? Then there's inflation in the next 6 months. Then after 6 months, the price of bread is now 12 rand, right? And you bring back my 10 rand. Can you see that that 10 rand can no longer buy the same bread it used to buy 6 months back? So inflation has favored the one who had borrowed than me who has lended out the money. Especially when the inflation rate is growing higher than the interest rate. Because when I borrow you, remember I also charge you interest. So if inflation rate is higher than the interest rates, or is growing at a rate higher than the interest rate, definitely inflation favors the borrowers than the lenders. Again, inflation favors young people than elderly, because elder people, they invest their monies into pension funds for years and years and years and years and years. And us, the young ones, we go and borrow 100,000 and stuff. Can you see? So in other words, I've borrowed from those elderly people, even though I did not approach them directly. I only approached a bank or a pension fund institution. So it's in your notes as well. Let's look at the economic effects of inflation. Definitely inflation affects economy badly. Let me see in my notes. Yes, if it's almost the same as the previous one. If I've been saving money, I know I have 100,000 in my bank account. Then there's suddenly a huge increase in price levels. Then when I go to check out my savings that I've been saving, you find that they've become useless because prices have increased so fast. That money that I was saving, it's becoming useless. It's not buying what I was expecting it would buy. So it discourages people from savings. And remember, savings are very important in the economy. And then what else? Read there the notes. Social and political effects. This one is obvious. When prices increase, people become distressed. They can no longer afford things properly. They start being angry against the government. Opposition parties, they start pointing fingers to the existing government. Everybody's pointing fingers to each other. So there's becomes unrest, political riots and stuff. And then expected inflation is another effect. Expected inflation is something like when there's inflation today, we start expecting that there will be inflation tomorrow, or prices will continue increasing. And when we start expecting that, we start buying things in bulk today. And when we start buying things in bulk today, we are causing prices to increase. So inflation expectations causes inflation or further inflation. You will remember during the lockdowns, we would expect I don't have a good example. Yeah, I don't have a good example. But when we expect prices to increase, we panic. We buy out of panic. And as we buy out of panic, we are causing inflation to actually exist. Okay? Now, there are causes of inflation, many of them, but we need to focus on two. Never mind my hands. I was dying my partner. two types of inflation. Please know these ones. They are always in your assignments, always in your exams. The demand pull inflation and the cost push inflation. It's very simple to understand them. The demand pull inflation is the price increases that have been caused by high demand for goods and services in the economy. They also call it too much money chasing too little goods. There's a huge demand for goods and services while the supply for goods and services is more or less standing or is not increasing. You know, I've been explaining this, that whatever is in high demand becomes expensive. So this is demand pull inflation. It pulls prices up because of high demand. And what causes a demand pull inflation? All the components of aggregate expenditure. Consumption expenditure, government expenditure, all types of expenditure, as you know, as we're discussing them in the 45-degree line during the multipliers lessons. All those ones, each one of them, they are causes of demand pull inflation. You need to know that. And graphically, this is how you show demand pull inflation in the ADAS curve or model. ADAS model. Graphically, this is how you show. These are price levels, never mind this. This is your aggregate supply. This is your aggregate demand. This is your point of equilibrium. Okay, this was your Y0, this was your P0. This is the economy. Now, when there's a demand pull inflation, for example, remember we were showing when there's an increase in government expenditure, what happens? The AD curve shifts to the right. You need to be able to connect these things. They are a chain. Each study or each tutorial or each study unit is not a standalone. It's connected. It builds up to each other. This thing is being explained in many different angles, but it's still explaining the same thing. Remember when we were showing the ADAS model, we said when there's an increase in government expenditure, the AD curve will move to the right. Look at what has happened. It has caused inflation. It has caused prices to go up, even as production levels and income go up as well. Okay? Now, remember we said inflation is the general increase in price levels over a period of time. So these prices keep on increasing. The AD curve, there's high demand for goods and services. It keeps on shifting to the right. Can you see the prices keep on increasing to higher levels? Now, this is what you need to be very much aware of. This situation reaches a level where supply curve or the aggregate supply ends up not being able to follow the high demand. It ends up stopping at a certain point while the aggregate demand keeps on increasing. Can you see? Now production levels have come to a point where suppliers are unable to increase their supply in the economy. It's standing here now. It can no longer move to higher levels, but because aggregate demand keeps on increasing, can you see now inflation is even increasing at a higher rate? So this is how you show demand pull inflation. This shape is very important. Okay, demand pull inflation. Read the notes as well for further understanding. Now let's look at the cost push inflation. Now the cost push inflation, the demand is a pull, the cost is a push. Now this is inflation caused by increase in the cost of production. Very first one that will always come to your mind is the wages. Increase in wages. Because wages are a huge input in any production of goods and services. So when for example, the unions are pushing for higher wages, obviously it becomes expensive for suppliers or producers or sellers of whatever goods and services. It becomes expensive for them to produce whatever they produce. And when it becomes expensive for them to produce whatever they produce, they also increase the prices. So in the ADAS curve, how do you reflect a cost push inflation? The AS curve moves to the left. Why? Because supply falls. It becomes expensive to supply. And can you see what happened to prices? Can you see what happened to levels of production in the economy? This is a cost push inflation. Let's see what are the causes of cost push inflation. Increase in wages, cost of imported capital and intermediate goods. Some of the things we need to produce huge equipment, normally most of them we import them. These are called capital goods. So their increase in costs, increase in profit margins. When when suppliers become greedy, they start increasing their profit expectations or profit margins. Profit is also, it doesn't make general sense to say profits are also a cost of production, but they are. Remember, the factors of production in the economy: it's labor, which they earn wages; it's land, which earns interest, right? It's capital, which earns land earns rent, capital earns interest, and then entrepreneurship earns profits. Can you see? These are factors of production. Hence, profits are also counted here as one of the pushers of, or the causes of cost push inflation. And the decrease in productivity. How is that so? When people become less productive, but they are still earning the same amount of money they are earning, they come to work, they sleep, they sit in the toilet and speak for hours on the phone, the productivity levels are going down while they are still earning the same salaries and wages. So what happens in that situation is that it becomes expensive to produce per unit of product or service. Okay? Natural disasters, of course. Suddenly there is tsunami. It floods out the farms, floods out many things, factory buildings and stuff. Can you see? The cost of production, it pulls down the electricity infrastructure. It becomes expensive to produce, and that causes inflation. Okay, done with inflation. Study unit 9, unemployment. We did show how to calculate unemployment rate, and now we're discussing the costs of unemployment in the society, cost to an individual and cost to the society. Unemployment is a huge cost to an individual. We all know when you're unemployed, stress levels rise up. Some people become short-tempered, divorces, anger, demoralization. We know, especially in their families, the attention they give to someone who is employed, who is a provider at home, versus the attention they give to somebody who's unemployed. And you find that you are the eldest at home, you are unemployed, and the youngest at home is employed. You start finding the whole family starting to give respect to the views of the one who is employed versus the views of the one who's unemployed. Can you see how that affects the person psychologically? And then in the society, obviously, the whole society gets affected by unemployment. Crime levels, political unrest, demonstrations, and so forth. Unemployment in the Keynesian model or ADAS model. If they say show unemployment in the Keynesian model, you need to know one thing first. There's a relationship between employment levels and production levels. And in any graph you will ever draw, for the first time you'll find the production levels being on the vertical line. Remember, y always is here. But when you're doing this, the y now shifts to here, and n represents employment levels. So the relationship is that as employment levels increase, production levels increase, but at a diminishing rate. So this is a production curve. What do they call it? Let me see. Page 404. Production function, yes, this is the production function. I'm just going to say PF, production function. Can you see there's a positive relationship between employment levels and production levels? Remember Y represents income and production. So as another one increase, another one increase. But production levels increase at a diminishing rate. They reach a point where further increase in employment levels ends up not adding anything to production levels. It has stopped somewhere here and then it's starting to go like this. Okay? So yes. So when you're drawing your graph, you're just showing it like this, you're done. You reach a certain point and then you do it like this. And then you say employment 0 level or 1 level, and then income at 0 level. But if here is 0, here must be 0. If you used 1, must use 1. If you use 2, here must use 2. And then your graph is complete like that. I've never seen it being asked, or I've seen it once, but just know it. Okay? What else? You know the types of unemployment, your structural unemployment, seasonal unemployment, and so forth. We discussed those ones in details. We're not going to go back to them. And also another thing you need to know, something you can find in multiple choice or something like that. An increase in employment levels does not necessarily mean a decrease in unemployment rate. Let me tell you why. Because employment levels can increase, but only to find that the labor force, people that are entering the labor market from schools, from wherever, is increasing faster than the increase in employment levels. So can you see? Employment can increase, but only to find that it did not decrease the unemployment rate. Okay? The last one, economic growth. Economic growth, you know how to calculate economic growth, the GDP, the real GDP versus the nominal GDP, you know it. Relate, when you, for the first time, you can study until study unit 10. We are on study unit 10, by the way, now, economic growth. When you come back for the second time, repeating the lessons, immediately after going through study unit 1, skip to study unit 8, 9, 10. It's a repetition of the same thing. Just see how everything is related. So there you just need to go back and check employment growth, economic growth, explain why is it important to use the real GDP or per capita GDP when measuring economic growth instead of nominal one. Because remember, the nominal GDP does not take inflation into account, while the real GDP takes inflation into account. My power just went off, so it has become dark, but as long as the board is clear, it's fine. And then you need to know the problems associated with GDP as a measure of total production in the economy. You also need to master the business cycle. We did the business cycle there in study unit 1. You know the business cycle will always be there in the exam and assignments. This is your business cycle. This is time period. This is economic activity. What is this? I forgot what this is. I think this is the what path, expansion path or whatever. I forgot. Now you need to know the 4 phases of the business cycle. This is the recession. You may name it A and then say recession. And then this, actually let me just leave it like that for now. And then this is your recession. This is your peak or boom. 2 words that you can use. It's either a boom or a peak. The economy is at the top. Now the difference between, or the distance between a recession and a peak is the upswing. Upswing between A and B. So it's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're left with 1. Let's say here it's C, which is another recession again. You don't need to name this one. Now the move from B to C, it's a downswing. This is an upswing. This is a downswing. It makes clear sense. Okay? What else? That's it. Thank you so much. Any question? I'm here. This is a wrap for Eco 10B. The next thing, once there is a scope, we're going to try and summarize the scope but please don't think there will be a much explanation of everything again, because you have the tutorials. Go through all of them. Then during once there's a scope, it's a matter of emphasizing, know this from the heart, know this for sure, know this for sure, know this for sure. You know, my tip, especially when going to the exams, there are things that you need to know for sure, dark or blue. You need to know that I master the ADAS curve. I don't care how they bring it. I master the business cycle. I don't care how they bring it. I master the calculation of inflation, employment, and stuff. I don't care how they bring it. Now you know that mastering those things only takes you to 50% of the marks in the exam. Then start trying to understand other things, but knowing that there are things you have mastered. There are things that you know for sure. And those are the things that we know for sure they will be in the exam. You get the point? The ADAS curve will always be in the exam. The business cycle usually, macroeconomic objectives, listing them and explaining them will always be there. The multiplier, equilibrium level of income, full employment level of income, that multiplier thing will always be in the exam with a lot of marks. Master those things. Thank you so much.